All right, hello everyone. Top of the morning to y'all. Here's Dan coming at you from Dan's Astrology on the 1st of March, 2026. This video is about the planet Mars, which, as you can see, is on the 29th degree of Aquarius, about to ingress into Pisces. This shall be the topic of today's video. And I have to admit that I have been pacing myself out with the production of astrology content, and I have not made a video about Mars squaring Uranus. But as you may be able to tell, that Mars is the sign, or Mars is the planet, the god of war, ruling all kinds of acts of violence and eruptions of conflict. And if you're paying attention to what's been happening in the news recently, there's obviously no shortage of that going on. And I have to admit that, maybe I may be slacking off or taking it's my strategy that I'm in it for the long haul here, right? I'm in it to I'm not going to burn myself out stressing out about a Mars Uranus conjunction or square in my I don't know. I tend to feel like Mars Uranus is one of these things that it's easy to get worked up about or stressed up about, but it seems to actually be fairly delivering at least. But one of the things about Mars that I've noticed since I've been doing astrology is that the signs the practice of astrology, you have to understand, comes from taking there's the phenomenon, first of all, of looking at the night sky and seeing the planets and the constellations, and then the signs are 12 equal divisions of the sky. And it's kind of like placing the man-made cookie cutter over top of the undivided thing, and there are these stark divisions between one sign and another. And when a planet moves from one sign to another, there's a changing of the rulership of that planet, the dignity of that planet, the kind of aspects that planet are making. Now, different kinds of astrology are going to put less emphasis on this than others. The kind that I like to practice, it's one of these funny quirks because it's like there's in some way the act of splitting the sky into 12 equal parts is kind of like an artificial thing to do. But then if you look, and it could also be that, when you're looking at how the actions of man on the world, maybe the actions of man are somewhat mechanical and artificial and all this. But nonetheless, it does seem to work. It does seem that whenever a planet switches signs, or whenever specifically Mars switches signs, there's usually some kind of conflict. And I think that together with the recent square to Uranus you can see, I mean, you obviously, I might as well get into it. There is a war breaking out between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and the United States and Israel are attacking Iran. And here, where I live in Canada, apparently the Iranians are actually quite happy about this because they don't like the Iranian regime. However, just because I mean, any number of outcomes could come from this. And so it's kind of like if people are hopeful that this is just going to be like, oh, a tyrannical regime is going to be taken out, and then, finally we'll have peace and stability in the Middle East. Like, I don't necessarily, you don't really want to get ahead of yourself here. But as an astrologer, if you take what I've said so far about how there are these artificial, well, whatever. We're doing this act of taking the whole and dividing it into 12 equal parts. And as you can see here, tomorrow, Mars will enter Pisces, and we will have a stellium, including the Sun, Mars, the Sun, Mercury, and Venus, all in Pisces. And this has been part of this kind of lineup of planets that is parading through the zodiac. And as an astrologer, regardless of whether or not you use this, I mean, this is the whole thing. There's using the gift of foresight that astrology provides us. Pisces is a water sign, and it has the dignity of Venus. Venus's exaltation, and we've got this year we're going to have a Venus retrograde, which doesn't happen every year. Mercury retrogrades happen all the time. Venus retrogrades only happen maybe once every 2 years, I think, or something like that. There's a certain cycle with Venus retrogrades that's more spread out. Anyways, I'm exposing my amateurness here, but anyways, there's a lot of dynamics that Mars is mixed up in with this Mercury retrograde, with this Venus, with the Sun, with this North Node, and it's not like what I'm more concerned about is after Pisces we have Aries, Mars's Yongy fire home sign, where the big Saturn Neptune conjunction is happening, and don't forget that Chiron is in that sign as well, and has been for quite a while now. And that, so basically, Mars is in Pisces tomorrow, and then Mars is out of Pisces into Aries on the 10th of April. So we have basically a month and 10 days of Mars in Pisces to deal with. And the things that we want to watch for with this one primarily are, well, we're coming into a lunar eclipse first of all, and it doesn't help that Mars is entering the situation in the midst of the lunar eclipse, but whatever, this is what we got to deal with. So the whole eclipse season is going to be colored by Mars and Pisces, and this, but at least Mars is on a cast of characters where Venus is in exaltation, meaning that Venus stands for, if Mars is about war, Venus is about peace, and in the midst of all this conflict, there's a couple things. Look, I'm not a political analyst, but from what I understand, the whole problem about Afghanistan and Pakistan is that America lost the war in Afghanistan, the Taliban took over, and that the Taliban have been accused of disregarding the border with Pakistan and basically causing trouble with the Pakistanis. And now the Pakistanis are pissed at them and fighting back, and the Taliban are just denying that they're even doing anything. And the problem about this is that the Taliban are terrorist guerrilla fighters, and Pakistan is not. The whole thing is that we've had this whole thing about guerrilla warfare and then like long range missile attacks. And the thing about this is whether or not Pakistan and Afghanistan, like at what scale of conflict are they really going to be going at it? And then comparing that to what's going on in Iran, which is like, there's some kind of like pattern here where they have limited exchanges of missiles that they just fire off at each other and blow shit up. And the thing about this is that the biggest problem that we're faced with is that we have a big stockpile of lots of bombs and rockets that could potentially be used, and that each time one of these bombs and rockets is used, not only the problem about whatever damage to civilian casualties or infrastructure or whatever, but there is, from an environmentalist perspective, if you're fighting climate change, the number one enemy of climate change is blowing up a whole bunch of bombs and missiles when that could be avoided, right? Like if you want to be so like. There's the interests of an environmentalism are hand in hand with the interests of the peace movement, and that even if you might be all gung ho for like a regime change of a tyrannical regime or whatever, just because this could just be an excuse to blow some shit up and nothing fundamentally changes. And also, if you consider in the whole context of the release of the files, that it could be an elaborate wag the dog maneuver. And don't forget about, with a stellium of Pisces planets, the Pisces conspiracy. Need I say more? there could be all sorts of levels of subterfuge, subtle influence going on here. Undersurface undercurrents, political espionage. But the point is that as an astrologer, what's encouraging about this is that with a well-dignified Venus, the well-dignified Venus is losing her dignity and heading into the Aries conjunction shortly after this. There's going to be a triple conjunction of Venus, Saturn, and Neptune. We'll get around to that one, but and then Mars will be crossing over the North Node, meaning that we have this interesting situation with Mars and Venus in each other's sign, which is, well, sort of like a mutual reception with exaltation, dignity, I guess. Eventually, we're going to be having some aspects where there's going to be a trine to Jupiter. There'll be a new moon in Pisces with Mars nearby. And eventually, Mars will make a sextile to Uranus. So these same kind of unpredictable dynamics will be set off before the sextile is less dramatic than the square, before Mars heads into Aries. And this is what I'm more concerned about, is what's happening in April. So basically, what I'm trying to delineate here is that Mars in Aries wants to be more direct and confrontational. However, it's running into there's a whole load of bullshit to deal with Saturn and Neptune that's going to obstruct a direct confrontation, right? And that is going to be an interesting problem to deal with once we get there. But in the meantime, what we're dealing with is a Mars that is mixed up in Pisces with a Mercury retrograde, meaning that it is going to be more about communicating and negotiating the terms of the conflict, which are going to erupt perhaps in April. And I think at some basic level, what is more problematic here is, of course, the general level of absurdity of the situation, based on, for example, I don't know, last year when I was making astrology videos, I kind of confronted the issue of tariffs, because as a Canadian, a lot of what is on the mind of Canadian, or I don't know, at least that's what I pay attention to. There's we're in a trade war, tariff war with the United States, and at this point in time, it has just broken down into complete absurdity, because if you've noticed that the American legal system is trying to make tariffs illegal, but then Trump is trying to do them anyways, and that it's come to the point where it's like even trying to approach the topic is an exercise in absurdity. There's a certain, there's more to do right now over the next month and 10 days of Mars being mixed up in a kind of indirectness and miscommunication and just craziness with Mercury retrograde in Pisces, and that is going to maybe feel confusing. It could be a very confusing time, kind of, there could be like pots on the stove bubbling over with that water quality, or things that are just like loose ends, certain kinds of the fabric, the loose ends of the fabric unraveling, things fall apart. Who's the link? I don't know. The Mars may want to cut ties with things that aren't working, and so there may be a revision of contracts with Mercury and Pisces, but the contracts are heavily loaded with the emotional baggage rather than clear material accountability, basically, right? And implicit in this could be all sorts of subtle emotional threats or indirect emotional communication. The it's not about like direct military conflict, but more of maneuvering the subtleties of social situations, of which you could be have talent in one area, but not be so graceful in another, or you could be just inept at all of it, right? And with Mercury retrograde here, it's and eclipse season, it's a messy time, let me tell you, and it's just an interesting time to be heading into. You can see around here the Mars will be conjunct Mercury retrograde in the Ides of March. The Ides of March. It's going to get messy in the Ides of March. And at Dan's Astrology, we're here for it. We're here to bring you next level astrology content. Just excuse me if I have to pace myself out a little bit. Things be getting hectic in 2026. Thanks for watching, guys.